Once the most powerful tractor company in the world, a Canadian giant that outsold John Deere and International Harvester in global markets, Massey-Harris didn't just fade away. It was swallowed whole by the very company it thought it was rescuing. What happened inside those boardrooms, on those factory floors, and in the desperate merger that destroyed a 100-year legacy is one of the most shocking corporate collapses in agricultural history. And almost nobody talks about it. The giant that built Canada. To understand how Massey-Harris fell, you have to understand what it was, because what it was extraordinary. The story begins in 1847, in a small workshop in Newcastle, Ontario. A farmer named Daniel Massey opened what he called the Newcastle Foundry and Machine Manufactory. He started small, assembling threshing equipment imported from the United States. But over time, he began designing and building his own machinery. His son Hart Massey eventually took over the operation, renamed it the Massey Manufacturing Company, and moved it to Toronto in 1879, where it became one of the most important industrial employers in the entire city. Meanwhile, about 120 kilometers away in Brantford, Ontario, a rival was building his own agricultural empire. Massey-Harris founded A. Harris & Son, a company that quickly became Massey's fiercest competitor. Canadian farmers were famously split into camps, those who swore by Massey, those who swore by Harris, and those who swore at both of them. The competition was fierce, passionate, and deeply personal. That rivalry ended in 1891, not in a courtroom, but in a boardroom. Hart Massey, facing a superior product from Harris, specifically the open-end grain binder that dominated the European market, didn't fight back with a better machine. He proposed a merger. Massey-Harris agreed. On May 6, 1891, the Massey-Harris Company Limited was formally established, creating an agricultural powerhouse unlike anything Canada had ever seen. The newly combined company moved fast. It acquired the Verity Plough Company in 1892, the Bain Wagon Company in 1895, and Johnston Harvester Company in 1910, its first American acquisition. Massey-Harris was building an empire, not just a business. The pivotal moment came in 1928, when Massey-Harris purchased the J.I. Case Plough Works in Racine, Wisconsin, a move that came with the highly respected line of Wallace tractors. These rugged, innovative machines became the foundation of Massey-Harris's entire tractor identity going forward. The Wallace tractors gave them the engineering credibility and the product line they had been missing. From there, the company began producing some of the most beloved machines in agricultural history. In the 1930s, Massey-Harris made agricultural history in two ways. First, they introduced the world's first self-propelled combine harvester. This was not an incremental improvement. This was a revolution. Farmers no longer needed a separate tractor to pull their combine through the field. The machine did it all by itself. Second, the company produced the general-purpose four-wheel drive tractor, one of the world's first, an iconic machine of which roughly 3,000 were built. By the late 1930s, their red-styled pacemaker tractor had become one of the most recognizable agricultural machines in North America. By World War II, Massey-Harris was supplying military machinery to the Allied forces and operating factories not just in Canada, but in France, Germany, and beyond. After the war, they came roaring back. In 1946, Massey-Harris launched a completely new line of tractors, and for the first time, these machines were powered by engines the company built entirely in-house. They introduced four models: the 22-horsepower MH22, the 35-horsepower MH44, and the 55-horsepower MH55. These red tractors became icons. In 1947, they added the tiny Model 11 Pony, a compact 10-horsepower tractor designed for small farms and truck gardens that sold for 10 years straight. The company was on top of the world. And then they made a decision that would slowly but surely unravel everything they had built: the Ferguson deal and the seeds of confusion. In the early 1950s, one man was reshaping the entire tractor industry: Harry Ferguson. Born in Northern Ireland in 1884, Ferguson was a mechanical genius with a stubborn streak the size of a continent. He had developed what became known as the Ferguson system, a revolutionary three-point hitch linkage that allowed implements to be attached directly to a tractor and hydraulically controlled with extraordinary precision. This wasn't just a convenience, it fundamentally changed how farmers worked. Ferguson had partnered with Ford from 1939 onward, producing the Ford-Ferguson tractors that became enormously popular. But the partnership with Ford collapsed bitterly in 1947 when Henry Ford II abruptly ended the handshake agreement that Ferguson and the original Henry Ford had operated under. Ferguson sued Ford for $340 million, one of the largest lawsuits in history at the time, and eventually settled for $9.25 million. After the split with Ford, Ferguson started his own manufacturing operation. In England, he produced the Ferguson TE20, the designation standing for Tractor England 20 horsepower. In 1948, he opened a plant in Detroit and introduced the TO20 for the American market, Tractor Overseas 20 horsepower. By 1951, he had upgraded the engine and launched the TO30 with 30 horsepower. These tractors were everywhere. They were lightweight, affordable, brilliantly engineered, and equipped with Ferguson's legendary three-point hitch. Farmers loved them. Dealers moved them as fast as they arrived. Massey-Harris was watching all of this very carefully and getting nervous. Their own tractors were solid and well-respected, but Ferguson was winning the volume game. His machines were simply outselling everything else in the light and mid-range segments. In 1953, Massey-Harris made a move that seemed brilliant at the time. They merged with the Ferguson Company to create Massey-Harris Ferguson. In one transaction, they jumped from a strong regional player to the second-largest farm equipment manufacturer in the entire world, behind only International Harvester and ahead of John Deere. The new entity had access to the famous Ferguson system, meaning all their new tractors could now offer the three-point hitch, a huge selling point, at a time when competitors were still playing catch-up on that technology. On paper, this was an unambiguous win, but the merger immediately created a problem that no one seemed to have a real solution for. Harry Ferguson himself was placed on the board of directors of the new company, and the merger agreement stipulated that both product lines would continue to be sold, one under the Ferguson brand and one under the Massey-Harris brand. What made this even more complicated was that each brand had its own entirely separate dealer network, 2 sets of dealers, 2 sets of product lines, 2 sets of customer expectations, all operating under one corporate roof. The confusion this generated was enormous, not just for customers walking into dealerships trying to figure out which tractor to buy, but for the company's own engineers and executives trying to figure out what to build next. When the company rushed to develop the Massey-Harris Model 50, which was essentially an American Ferguson 35 dressed up in Massey-Harris sheet metal, it triggered a major conflict. Massey-Harris dealers wanted a tractor like the Ferguson 35, so that's what they got. But then Ferguson dealers felt left behind, so the company made a version for them too and called it the Ferguson 40. 2 nearly identical tractors, 2 different brand names, sold by 2 competing dealer networks belonging to the same parent company. Harry Ferguson himself didn't last long. In under a year, he left the board in a bitter dispute over the design of the Massey-Harris Model 50. He walked away, never to return to the company that bore part of his name. For 5 years, from 1953 to 1958, the company operated under this chaotic 2-line policy. Between those years, the product lineup became genuinely bewildering. In the 30 horsepower class alone, there was the Ferguson TO35 and the Massey-Harris 50, which became the Massey Ferguson 50 after the name was shortened. There was also the triple numeral series, the MH333, the MH444, and the MH555, numbered to reflect their horsepower ratings, all sold alongside overlapping Ferguson models. Finally, in 1958, the company dropped the Harris name and became simply Massey Ferguson. They attempted to consolidate the 2 dealer networks and the overlapping product lines into something coherent. In late 1957, they launched what became the first true Massey Ferguson branded tractor, the MF35, born from the Ferguson 35 design. This was followed by the MF65, the MF85, and the MF88. By the mid-1960s, Massey Ferguson claimed to be the largest farm tractor manufacturer in the world. But that title masked some serious structural problems that were quietly accumulating beneath the surface. The golden years hide the cracks. Through the 1960s, Massey Ferguson expanded aggressively on the global stage. They purchased Perkins Engines of Peterborough, England in 1959, a company that had long been their primary diesel engine supplier. Now they controlled their own engine production, which gave them a significant competitive and cost advantage. In 1955, they had acquired the Australian firm Sunshine, founded by Hugh Victor Mackay, bringing in their harvesting expertise. In 1966, they purchased a 32% stake in the Spanish company Motor Iberica, known as Ebro, which had previously built Ford tractors under license and now began producing Massey Ferguson models. The company was building tractors on every continent. Their MF135, introduced as part of the 100 series, became one of the best-selling tractors in history. Reliable, maneuverable, powerful enough for most farm applications, and available globally. Farmers from Ireland to India drove them. The red Massey Ferguson became the universal symbol of the working farm. In 1955, they signed a 7-year licensing agreement with a Yugoslav company called IMT, based in Belgrade, allowing IMT to build Massey Ferguson tractors for the Eastern European market. The brand was literally everywhere, and yet the company was running on borrowed time. Sometimes quite literally. The aggressive global expansion came with a heavy financial cost. Massey Ferguson was consistently operating with high levels of debt, relying on short-term financing to fund what were essentially long-term strategic decisions. They were borrowing expensive short-term money to finance things like inventory and accounts receivable, assets that don't generate immediate returns. This was a dangerous way to run a capital-intensive manufacturing business. At the same time, the company was spending heavily on new product development, maintaining factories across multiple continents, supporting 2 separate dealer networks for years, and trying to compete with deeply capitalized rivals like John Deere and International Harvester, both of whom were investing heavily in their own technologies and dealer relationships. The warning signs were there, but in an era of agricultural expansion, global growth, and rising farm commodity prices, it was easy to look at the sales numbers and feel like everything was fine. It wasn't. When everything collapsed, the crisis didn't announce itself gradually. It arrived like a sledgehammer. In 1980, the United States imposed a grain embargo on the Soviet Union following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This single geopolitical decision sent shockwaves through the agricultural sector globally. Grain prices dropped, farm incomes fell, farmers stopped buying new equipment. At almost exactly the same time, the U.S. Federal Reserve raised interest rates to combat runaway inflation. The prime lending rate, which had averaged 6.8% soared to an all-time high of 21.5% For a company as heavily leveraged as Massey Ferguson, this was catastrophic. The cost of carrying their debt became crushing almost overnight. Massey Ferguson reported losses in excess of $200 million in 1982. So did Allis-Chalmers. So did International Harvester. Though International Harvester's situation became so severe, they eventually had to sell their agricultural division to Case in 1985, forming Case IH. The entire farm equipment industry was in freefall. For Massey Ferguson, the situation was uniquely severe because of how the company had chosen to finance itself. Their heavy dependence on short-term debt meant that when interest rates spiked, they couldn't refinance at manageable rates. The company had tried to issue preferred stocks in April 1980 to raise capital, but that effort failed. By early 1981, the company could not meet its short-term obligations. They were in default. The Canadian federal government stepped in beginning in 1981 with financial assistance to prevent the complete collapse of one of Canada's most iconic corporations. But government bailouts buy time. They don't fix structural problems. The company began selling off pieces of itself to survive. In 1989, their four-wheel drive tractor business was sold to McConnell Tractors. They sold the majority of their stake in Landini, the Italian manufacturer they had been a partner with for years, to Argo Spa. They sold their interest in the Spanish Motor Iberica to Nissan. Piece by piece, the empire was being dismantled. The 1980s also produced one of the most notorious product failures in the company's history, the 600 series tractors. Introduced mid-decade, these machines were widely criticized for unattractive styling and poor ergonomics. The cab sat much higher than previous MF models, making the tractor excellent for visibility in field operations, but awkward and impractical for livestock work. Sales were poor. The product line was quietly discontinued. In 1990, the company rebranded itself as Verity Corporation, a name that deliberately distanced the parent company from the agricultural struggles of the Massey Ferguson brand. The Massey Ferguson name was kept for the farm equipment division, but the corporate identity was being stripped away. By 1992, the last of the industrial and construction equipment was gone. A management buyout created a separate company called Fermec, which took the construction equipment operations. Fermec itself eventually ceased trading in 2001 when it was acquired by Terex Corporation. In 1994, Verity Corporation sold the Massey Ferguson Farm Equipment Division to AGCO Corporation, an American agricultural equipment company based in Duluth, Georgia. The price was $328 million in cash and $18 million in stock. For the company that had once been the second largest farm equipment manufacturer in the world, this was the end of independence. What killed Massey-Harris? So what actually killed Massey-Harris? Was it the merger with Ferguson, the two-line policy, the debt, the 1980s farm crisis? The answer is all of those things, and the way they compounded each other over decades. The merger with Ferguson in 1953 was the right strategic move made in the wrong way. The decision to continue operating two completely separate brand identities and dealer networks for 5 years after the merger was an enormous mistake. It created confusion at every level, for dealers, for customers, for engineers, and for executives. It diluted both brands instead of strengthening one. The resources wasted on maintaining duplicate systems could have been invested in genuine product innovation. When the company finally unified under the Massey Ferguson name in 1958, it had already spent critical years in organizational chaos. The two-line policy didn't just confuse farmers, it damaged relationships with dealers who felt caught in the middle of a corporate identity crisis. Some of the best dealers walked away entirely. The financial mismanagement of the growth years was equally damaging. Massey Ferguson treated global expansion as if it could be funded on credit indefinitely. They stretched into Spain, Yugoslavia, Australia, Argentina, India, all valuable markets but all requiring capital investment that the company funded through short-term debt rather than retained earnings or long-term financing. When interest rates rose in the early 1980s, there was no buffer, there was no cushion, there was only debt. The 1980s farm crisis would have hurt every equipment manufacturer, and it did. But John Deere survived because they had maintained a more conservative financial structure. They had built up reserves during the good years rather than borrowing their way through them. Deere emerged from the 1980s battered but intact. Massey Ferguson emerged broken. There is also the question of identity. When the Massey-Harris name was folded into Massey-Harris Ferguson in 1953, and then shortened again to Massey Ferguson in 1958, and then the parent company was renamed Verity in 1990. At each stage, something of the original company was lost. The Massey-Harris identity, with all its 100-year Canadian heritage, was slowly erased. The pride that had driven Daniel Massey to build his first workshop in 1847, the competitive fire that had made Allinson-Harris a dominant force in the binder market, the innovation that produced the world's first self-propelled combine, all of that was slowly subsumed by corporate restructuring and financial crisis until there was almost nothing left to save. The afterlife, and what survives today. The story doesn't entirely end under AGCO ownership. The Massey Ferguson brand was actually revitalized rather than retired. AGCO recognized what the brand meant globally, particularly in markets outside North America, where Massey Ferguson was still the most recognized agricultural name in the world. At the time AGCO acquired the company, Massey Ferguson had roughly 20% global market share in tractors, with 87% of its sales occurring outside North America. AGCO purchased the brand precisely because it gave them an immediate global presence that would have taken decades to build from scratch. AGCO went about reassembling some of what had been sold off, acquiring McConnell Tractors, Massey Ferguson Argentina, and other operations that had been divested during the crisis years. They moved the primary manufacturing facility from Coventry, England, to Beauvais, France in 2003, where production continues today. The Beauvais factory is not a relic, it's a world-class manufacturing facility. In June 2022, the factory produced its 1,000th tractor bearing the Massey Ferguson name. The brand today offers models ranging from 16 horsepower compact tractors all the way up to the 9S series, announced in 2023, which delivers up to 425 horsepower. In 2008, the MF8600 series became the first agricultural tractor in the world to feature selective catalytic reduction emissions technology. In 2020, the MF8S series won both the Red Dot Design Award and the prestigious Tractor of the Year title. Today, Massey Ferguson is frequently cited as the most widely sold agricultural machinery brand in the world. A remarkable fact, given everything the company went through in the 1970s, 80s. But Massey-Harris? That name is gone. The red tractors with the distinctive Massey-Harris script, the machines that changed farming on every continent, the company that Daniel Massey built from a single workshop in 1847. That identity exists only in museums, on collectors' farms, and in the memories of those who drove them. The name Massey-Harris does not appear on any new tractor made today. It has not for decades. So that's it for today. If you liked this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thanks for watching.